If this quiet history stirs you, please subscribe. Subscribe for more traces of Ice Age shores. Subscribe to drift back each night. If this gentle history soothes you, please subscribe. Before the deck lights, there was the glow of a thermos cap, the metal rim warm against chapped lips, the steam perfuming the air with bitter tea and a thread of citrus oil. She was a maritime archaeologist who preferred pencils to pens, graphite to ink because dampness blurred certainty. The neoprene clung to her like cold moss as she checked the tether to the remotely operated vehicle, listening to the muted whir of thrusters testing in the dark. In a plastic tray lay tiny zip-tied vials labelled in a tight hand: silt, shell, charcoal, fibre. Her gloves creaked softly when she flexed them, recalling the first time she swam over a drowned dune, feeling sand move like sleeping breath beneath her fins. A fisherman, older than the harbour's oldest timbers, had told her where to lower the camera. Under the lamplight, she smiled, then slipped the robot into black water that tasted faintly of iron, ready to read the flattened script of the seafloor. At the foundation of this long shoreline story are small, stubborn facts that set their own low music. In wind-polished caves overlooking ancient dunes, ochre fragments bear cross-hatched engravings, the groove depth measured in fractions of a nail width, their edges worn smooth by handling. Shell beads, drilled with care, show microscars under the microscope, a halo of polish where cord once slid and tightened, smelling faintly of chalk and salt when wetted again in the lab. Nearby, stone points with a lustrous sheen reveal heater treatment, the glassy fracture speaking of controlled fires hot enough to change stones in a structure. These are delicate tasks done by quiet hands, proving the possession of method and patience. What power grew from such work, if not identity recognized at a glance? The strength to bind wood and stone into longer reach, the ritual of colouring skin and objects to draw circles of belonging. The surf answered then, as now, with permanent, living noise. In that era, coastlines lay like open corridors between ebb and dune, offering miles of shell-rich flats, lagoon mouths and river fans. Add a net woven of plant fibre, twisted with practiced fingers, scented slightly of sap and smoke, and an inlet becomes a larder. Set stone weirs where water breathes in and out, and a family gains predictable protein. The stones warm under sun by day and slick with moonlight at night. Child hands learn to read tide underfoot the way later scholars read ink, feeling pressure change through soles and ankles, lifting baskets with grit under nails. Such work mattered because it tamed a rhythm without forcing it, harvesting the swing between brine and fresh with craft instead of conquest. As empires would later learn, nothing binds people like food shared, and nothing frees them like surpluses saved as smoked strips and dried roe perfuming the air. Civilization, if the word must come, begins with nets, fire, and a calendar traced by the moon. Centuries later, when writing on clay catalogued tribute and conquest inland, another kind of ledger lay at the coast, unwritten but durable. A knuckle-deep notch carved into driftwood, aligned with a certain ridge on a certain hill. A mound of shells glazed by rain and sun, marked where to set baskets as the first silver backs of fish pressed inward. Under the flint's edge, the fibres of plants sang softly as they separated, the rhythm shared by mentors whose stories drifted like smoke. This ledger carried instructions for survival, rituals for making individuals legible to others, and a sense of horizon measured not by distance but by taste. The shift from brackish to sweet, the sweetness telling you when to drink. When storms tore the markers, people rebuilt them, proving that the power here was adaptation repeated until it became a faith. Who wrote the coastline's script if not practiced hands, salt-lined eyes, and minds trained to listen for change? Alongshore travel, instead of high-risk marches inland, threaded communities together like beads on a cord, the cord itself braided from kelp and sinew, oiled so it would slide without squeal. Charring wood to lighten and harden it, they shaped small watercraft that echoed drift logs, paddles that entered quietly and left no splash that would spook fish or seals. A beach produces a catalogue: shell for beads, bone for needles, sinew for lashings, pitch for waterproof seams, dry grasses that catch and hold tinder with a toasted perfume. This was work that multiplied power subtly, extending reach across coves and inlets, allowing ideas to drift with people, as meals and songs do. Sharing a design for an efficient fishware made kin across long geographical arcs, and giving a charm threaded with certain shells carried meaning like a passport. Such exchange needed no palaces, it needed calm water, steady hands, and night fires blinking like low stars along the dark shore. The tide remembers, even when it erases. Stone remembers too, though it speaks through chips and shine rather than names and boasts. In that age, someone learned to heat stone carefully in buried pits, the pit edges smelling of damp earth and charcoal, the heat creeping in until fracture patterns changed from dull to crisp. After cooling, the flakes sang when struck, their edges thin enough to part hide with soft pressure rather than brute force. People combined these edges with wooden shafts and mastic made of plant resin and powdered red earth, a compound with the fragrance of pine and dust. In this there is an early chemistry, a merging of materials held together by technique repeated and taught, proving collective attention. The value created lay not in the artifact alone, but in the teaching line. The way a child's hand steadied under an elder's touch. The way songs timing the steps kept embers aligned with breath. The sand remembers in muted ripples. Instruments hum softly. The hollow waits, patient as moonlit water. Many generations later, tales of the city under the waves appeared in coastal myth, told in low voices beside windy fires where sparks leaped and vanished. The myth made hierarchies from the sea itself, imagining welled courtyards cut from living stone and staircases worn smooth by ritual feet, echoes bouncing in chambers smelling faintly of damp limestone. Yet as diving became possible and instruments improved, the camera's unblinking eye found patterns less grand and more intimate. Post holes in parallel, indicating fences or pens, cobble lines tracing fish traps, patches of burned sand that told of repeated fires. An underwater microphone picked up the ocean's tremor, and, between pulses, silence where voices might once have been. The collision of legend and measured evidence did not accuse the legend, it refined it. Instead of a drowned palace, we see a drowned neighborhood, its value born of chores repeated until they became liturgy, and its power expressed in meals secured against uncertainty, in warm hands and full bellies. Centuries after that, when coastal maps grew precise and land grants stretched to tidal flats, another silence formed, smelling mostly of paper, glue, and dust. Records of submerged features, entries in logbooks, and sketches of regular stones were often filed under fisheries or dismissed as natural, the ink fading while tides carried sand across memory. Some suppression came from misaligned incentives, declaring old structures meant regulation and scrutiny that owners did not desire. Some came from awe, wearing the mask of disinterest, a reverence that refused to meddle with the quiet below. In the archives, drawers stuck before sliding open with a sigh. A map's faint blue grid revealed dots a hand had added with patience, suggesting a knowledge kept to a small circle. The power in such suppression was control over narrative, and the cost was the fading of techniques that had fed families for generations. The surf broke outside, and the building's windows rattled like a distant drum. In the language of instruments, truth arrives as a pattern. A sonar return sharper than surrounding chaos, a magnetometer twitch where iron should not be, a sub-bottom profiler drawing ghost lines beneath silt. The boat's hull creaked softly. Light blinked on screens in a dim cabin perfumed with coffee and engine oil. On one pass, a grid of pushers in the sand matched a known spacing for basket posts used in certain tidal ponds. On another, a U-shaped feature with a narrow throat suggested a weir designed to coax fish into a trap with the rising tide. These shapes, measured and mapped, added up to routine rather than spectacle, to lives structured by calendars made of water and moon. That is, civilization writ small and stubborn, prearranged cooperation, shared skill, rituals at predictable intervals, power from predictability rather than force. We study it with humming devices now, but it was built by hands that moved to the rhythm of waves. By then, genetic evidence had begun to whisper alongside the stones, a song of population movements that smelled, faintly somehow, of smoke and earth, because lab machines run hot and gloves gather dust. It suggested threads of kinship along coasts, a braided pattern consistent with boat crossings sheltered by islands and beach ridges. A shell bead type clustered in one region appeared far away, carried perhaps as a gift or as a token of obligation that outlasted a voyage. Such threads imply a ledger of debts and favours, the kind of bookkeeping that keeps groups whole without written marks. A person who arrived with smoked fish, green seal fat, and stories could claim shelter in exchange, proving the worth of remembered routes and seasonal timing. The smell of dried seaweed and the creak of leather carried news as surely as any crier. The ghosts of maps in our blood align with the ghosts of fences and fires checked by machines. The tide holds its counsel. Through ages of low sea, this literal commonwealth persisted, adapting as wind patterns shifted and rivers braided new mouths. When the coast stepped back as if inhaling, salt marshes spread, their grasses rustling with insect song like rain on paper. Communities shifted their markers, retied their nets, and traced new lunar calendars with sticks poked into damp sand. Value mattered here in two directions. Inward, as families prospered on steady protein and craft work. Outward, as exchange bound distant groups into mutual care. Power never required walls. It required flexible attention and a willingness to share precisely timed knowledge. Reverence filtered through work. A chant softly sounded when the first run of fish arrived. Pigment daubed on cheeks when a boat returning heavy made a channel bright with scales. These rites washed away quickly in literal water, yet they trained minds to believe in cycles, in return, in the dignity of repetition. Who would not build faith on dependable tides? Still, accidents also wrote silence across this world. A storm pitched steeper than memory lifted anchors and scattered weir stones, the sea tasting of torn plants and ground shell, the air carrying the metallic tang of shredded flotsam. Fire, sometimes escaped from a pit, ran through dry grasses and charcoaled the posts meant for baskets. A disease, unrecorded by script, passed through a camp and counted its victims in hush rather than tallies. When hardship layered with a shift in the shoreline, families moved, shoulders bowed under baskets that smelled of smoked fish and hope, leaving only footprints that wind erased. The sea later advanced with its usual patience, filling footprints with foam and then with sand. We speak of suppression by law or politics, but accident is the most ordinary librarian of forgetting, stamping books with silence. The ocean's long exhalation covered the shelves and left only the faintest index visible to instruments and eyes that learned to see. Across a bay, millennia later, a monk with red-stained fingers copied a passage about floods and lost gardens by lamplight that perfumed the scriptorium with wax and faint animal glue. He added a margin note about fishermen who pointed at an old alignment under clear water, a line of stones they avoided out of respect. His superior frowned, suggesting that such matters drew minds from higher truths, and the note remained small, tucked like a sigh against the main text. Books moved through hands and shelves, pages were rebound, the margin shrank until the note almost vanished under a new leather seam. Yet when a later restorer lifted the binding, the little voice returned, telling of stones in water arranged by someone's intention. Reverence had silenced the observation, not through malice, but through piety misapplied, transforming a community technique into a whisper. The work mattered because it fed bodies that later fed minds. The copyist felt the gentle asymmetry, but let the wax cool. In that same chain of memory, A coastal steward under a distant crown kept records of nets and taxes in a brittle notebook flavoured faintly with salt from his damp sleeve. He knew of submerged traps but omitted them, suspecting that acknowledging them would invite claims he would have to enforce against neighbours who kept his boat repaired in winter. He heard the low, rattling laugh of old fishers when younger men mentioned the forgotten lines, and he understood that laughter as warning, a shoreline way to maintain commons knowledge by making it seem foolish to outsiders. Some silence is a fence made of humour, of stories shaped to keep strangers away from certain coves. The value in such an omission was local stability. The power was the ability to keep a shared resource intact. Centuries later, the ledger where he wrote mended nets and collected coin sits flat in a museum drawer, the salt gone, the smell of cardboard rising like a thin fog. At low tide, some evidence refuses burial, standing like ribs when water drains. A line of stakes, softened and blackened, protrudes from a bay floor, their tips coated with velvet weed that smears fingers green. A careful hand can press a fingertip into the soft, damp wood and feel fibres that once yielded to an adz's rhythm. Nearby, necrotic sand gives underfoot with a hollow sigh, the underlayer holding a lens of charcoal where fires burned, the grains coated in sheen like sugar. These features do not ask to be palatial. They ask to be recognised as intention. We made a wall here, a funnel there, we cooked many nights here, we kept a memory of procedure that outlasted a lifetime. The wealth was accumulated in the form of regular dinners and the power to predict hunger's end, stored as songs about when to set and lift and eat. The air tastes briny and gulls call like knives hung on a line. As empires rose inland with noise of bronze and later iron, their captains often dismissed the literal arts as peasant craft, beneath notice except as catch tallies. A general's journal, smelling of lamp soot and oiled leather, might list coastal villages in columns of tribute, yet it rarely records the weird placements that quietly ensured those figures. Suppression by disinterest is still suppression, and it shapes what later scholars consider civilization. Yet the very smoothness of inland roads was subsidized by the quiet abundance of coastcraft, as dried fish travelled far and lit fires in mountain towns. The power relationship inverted elegantly. While armies marched, the sea kept feeding their step. In that era, a person who could read the smell of the tide iodine sharpness on the edge of a storm, the sweet rot that promised shellfish, held knowledge as valuable as any cuneiform scribe. The sea wrote in salt, and the script endured. Centuries flowed, and a surveyor, standing on an exposed sandbar at dusk, peered through a level that sipped at the fading light, the metal cool against his brow. His assistant held a rod steadily, boots sinking with a hiss into wet sand that smelled like cold pennies. Between them stretched a sheet of water whose surface trembled under an offshore breeze, the ripples blurring margins that maps demanded to fix. As the line steadied, he noted an anomaly, a regularity of bumps beneath a shallow channel that refused to be random. Later, rubbing his eyes gritty with sand, he inked the bumps as dots on a margin, not daring to clutter the official map. That reluctance was self-preservation, not malice. Still, under the dots lay a shape that would, in another age, look like a fishweir, a knowledge architecture stubborn and plain. Ripples made a soft, stroking sound along the measure's legs, as if urging something said, something not yet safe to remark loudly. The wind carried it away. On a different shore, far away but joined by the long necklace of human drift, a potter's pit near an ancient dune held bits of fired clay with finger imprints smooth as river stones. The impressions showed hands accustomed to knotting cord, the ridges patterned like woven mats, suggesting that textiles, now vanished, organised daily life as thoroughly as stone. The pit still carried a faint char smell when excavated, a surprise to noses used to dust and faint mould. Plant fibres imprinted into clay hovered at the edge of sight, proving that perishable arts had a registry in the underworld of fragments. Clothes, nets, bags, slings. These multiply hands and time, letting a person carry more, trap more, move farther with less loss. The stability their efficiency builds is civilization's stealth. A society that stores summer's glare as woven goods and winter's patience as plaited rope holds power that neither gleams nor clangs. A breeze lifted grit, and eyes watered pleasantly from mineral air. In this chain of living and leaving, pigments play the role of both signal and memory. Red ochre, ground to a fine powder that smells like damp stone and metal, mixed with fat or plant binder, becomes a paste that clings to skin with a soft drag. Applied to wrists, cheeks, or objects, it leaves a mark that says "we," the simplest and strongest pronoun. The presence of pigment on shells and tools found near ancient shorelines suggests that ritual threaded through the practical, that beginning or ending a season involved colour, song, and a tactile assertion of identity. The value here is cohesion, an adhesive more durable than resin alone, giving people the power to recognise kin and obligations. When later waters rose and rinsed these sites, the pigment remained in pores of stone and shell, stubborn as memory. Under LED light in a clean room smelling of ethanol, the red glows dully, like banked embers at the end of a night's labour. Centuries later, romance novels and philosophers alike wrote about cities lost to flood, stones wreathed in kelp, and bells that toll underwater like dreams. Their words smelled of ink, tannins, and sometimes cheap perfume when the books came new, and of dust and attic dryness when they aged. Such tales planted search images that bent eyes toward grandeur, away from the littler shapes that endure. If one expects a temple, one will misread a pen, and so many divers passed over the true veins of civilization in their hunt for marble. Suppression by glamour is a form of forgetting, beautiful and effective. Yet gradually, the patience of small studies accumulated, revealing that elaborate simplicity stones placed at proper distances, baskets woven to precise diameters, fires tended to steady heat, was the architecture of thriving lives. The power in this recognition is the restoration of dignity, a righting of a scale. The sea tasted of salt then, as now, refusing to sweeten anyone's fantasies. In 1963, a coastal survey ship lobbed an unexpected echo in a shallow bay, a tight V-shaped return repeated across several transects, the paper chart curling as warm air met cooler hull. The captain sniffed the air and declared it nearly windless. The smell of fuel faint but present, and the operator poured coffee that tasted of tin and patience. A botanist on board, hitching a ride to reach marsh sites, peered and murmured that the returns matched a certain fish trap geometry she had seen in an old ethnographic drawing. The report, filed, sat at the bottom of a stack. A decade later, a storm scoured the bay floor, and the trap stones surfaced in neat, regular arcs. The rediscovery arrived not with trumpets but with gloved hands lifting stones that slicked palms. Power often hides in persistence, and the value here was the enduring utility of a design that made the sea do the work. The instruments hummed, and gulls cried like laughter on the wind. Back in the core lab, optically stimulated luminescence teased time from grains that tasted of nothing and smelled faintly of plastic trays and rubbed latex. Each sample, taken from beneath the drowned shore, told of the last moment sunlight touched those grains before burial, a clock hidden in sand. The numbers translated into phrases before many thrones, after many droughts, aligned with sea level curves traced from coral terraces. No need to count exact years beyond a handful. Better to feel epochs like breezes that warmed or chilled the shore. The laboratory's hum seemed, to the tired listener, like surf stripped of its liquid body, yet the results anchored dreams. Mapping these ages onto the underwater features suggested a coastline where people built and rebuilt, proving a sustained presence. The gift of the technique was not a single date, but the cadence of occupation. Soft light reflected off the clean bench top, and a technician breathed slowly, as if careful not to wake the sleeping sand. The instruments blinked, then settled. Even inland, rivers carry coastal stories. Their braided mouths, now drowned, once perfumed the air with tannins, mud and flour, even near their estuaries. LiDAR over deltas shows drowned levees, faint under meters of water, hints of raised ground where camps could rest above spring floods. Canoes, or simple floats, sealed with sticky resins, would have slid along reed walls that rustled like parchment, carrying food inland and returning with stone from quarries, bone from hunts, or gossip about who fished where. These upstream and downstream exchanges gave shape to obligation networks that knit people into larger wholes without needing to stand in ranks. The river's surface, slick and glassy at dawn, would carry voices, the timbre softened by fog. In this way, value travelled, and power spread without lording over anyone, shared under the maxim that tide and flood both return. When these channels later drowned, they left traces that, once seen, appear obvious, as if always waiting for the right angle of light. Across an ocean, on a different shelf, the same economies appear as different accents, tidal pools fingering basalt, seaweeds with different tastes, shellfish with unfamiliar heft. Yet the pattern repeats, reliable as the hush before a wave breaks. This does not diminish local genius, it amplifies it, showing how the environment and human skill weave together to make civilization scale by pattern rather than empire. Where hardwoods grew, paddles thinned toward edges and smelled of sweet sap. Where softwoods dominated, paddles broadened and satiny oils soaked in to prevent splitting. In places where certain barnacles attached and cut feet, woven sandals spread with velvety friction underfoot. Inlet to inlet, the precise recipes of pitch varied. The breath timing of heat matched to local resins. The power this created was diversity overlapping with continuity, a tapestry that worked because errors could be corrected locally without issuing decrees. The sea taught this lesson and kept repeating it with every tide. Suppression sometimes came with force, not merely neglect. When raids from inland threatened, communities along the shore unbuilt their obvious structures, scattering stones and hiding posts under silt, the work quick and efficient, the sound more shuffle than crash. Better to disappear a trap than gift it to an enemy. Fire again played its role. A pen burned rather than captured. Memory moved into people and banished itself from the ground out of caution. Generations later, those structures remained absent, and without survivors to point the way, archaeologists could only